Most people don't notice it during the loud parts of the day. Not while they're answering emails, not while they're moving between meetings, not while they're scrolling. They notice it in a quiet moment. Maybe it's late at night. The house is calm, the TV is off. You open your banking app almost without thinking. Nothing looks broken. Your bills are paid, your paycheck arrived on time, you're not in a crisis. And yet, something feels heavy. Not panic, not emergency, just a quiet pressure in your chest. A sense that things are tighter than they should be. You don't see one obvious mistake. There isn't a single huge purchase you regret. There isn't a dramatic financial failure you can point to. On paper, your life looks stable, but internally, it feels fragile. You tell yourself you should feel more okay than you do. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You're working, you're handling responsibilities. You're not reckless. So why does it still feel this way? Why does money feel close, even when nothing big is wrong? For a long time, most people assume the answer must be income. If I just made a little more, this feeling would go away. If I got a better job, a raise, a side income, and sometimes income really is part of it, but many people eventually notice something confusing. They make more money, and the tightness doesn't disappear. The numbers change, the feeling stays. Not as sharp, not as loud, but still there. That's usually when the frustration starts, because it feels unfair. You did what you were told would fix it. You progressed, yet the sense of barely staying ahead never fully leaves. This video isn't about budgeting harder. It isn't about cutting everything enjoyable out of your life, and it isn't about blaming yourself. It's about something quieter, something that almost never shows up as a single bad decision, something that doesn't feel dangerous, something that slowly becomes normal. Most financial stress doesn't come from one dramatic collapse. It comes from tiny, reasonable choices that stack up on top of each other. Choices that make life more comfortable, choices that make life easier, choices that feel harmless in isolation, until one day you realize your money doesn't feel like a tool anymore. It feels like a constraint. Not because you failed, not because you were irresponsible, but because a pattern formed quietly. A pattern most people never notice while it's happening. That pattern is what we're going to start looking at. Most people imagine financial problems as cliffs, a sudden drop, a missed paycheck, a medical bill, a bad investment, something sharp enough to notice. But what actually happens for most people looks more like a slow slope, so gentle you don't feel yourself moving. Imagine standing on a long, shallow ramp. Each step feels flat. Nothing tilts enough to trigger alarm. But after a while, you look back and realize you're much lower than where you started. Money pressure usually works the same way. It doesn't arrive as danger. It arrives as convenience. An upgraded phone because the old one technically still works but feels annoying. Food delivery because you're tired. Streaming services because they're cheap. A nicer apartment because you want to feel settled. A newer car because you want reliability. None of these feel reckless. Most of them feel responsible. And that's the tricky part. Our brain labels these choices as improvements, upgrades, quality of life. We don't experience them as spending. We experience them as progress. Psychologically, this matters because when something feels like progress, we stop evaluating it. We stop asking what it costs in the long run. We only notice what it gives us in the short term: comfort, ease, reduced friction. The problem is that comfort has a subscription model, not always officially, but functionally. Once you adjust to a certain level of ease, that level becomes your baseline. Yesterday's luxury becomes today's normal, and normals don't feel optional, they feel necessary. You're no longer choosing, you're maintaining. This is why it feels so confusing. You don't remember deciding to lock in a higher monthly life, you just slowly did, one small yes at a time. Another way to think about it is weight, not physical weight, mental and financial weight. Each new expense doesn't feel heavy by itself. It's just a few pounds. But weight accumulates silently. You don't feel heavier from breakfast. You feel heavier after years of consistent surplus. Money pressure behaves the same way. It's not one purchase, it's the combined mass of many reasonable ones. There's also a social layer to this. We don't compare our spending to our past selves. We compare it to our environment, coworkers, friends, online lifestyles. So when we upgrade, it feels normal. When we match the room, it feels safe. Standing still starts to feel like falling behind, which subtly pushes us to raise our floor. Not dramatically, incrementally. And because the increases are incremental, they stay mostly invisible, until the margin disappears, until saving feels harder than it used to, until small surprises feel bigger than they should, until money starts feeling tight without an obvious villain. At this stage, many people assume they have a discipline problem or a budgeting problem, but most of the time it's neither. It's a structure problem, a life that slowly grew more expensive than their emotional relationship with money kept up with, not because they were careless, not because they were chasing status, but because they were responding normally to a world designed to sell ease. A world that quietly teaches better is always available, and better always costs a little more. I remember a period where, from the outside, things looked fine. My income was steady, my bills were covered, nothing unexpected was happening. If someone had asked how I was doing financially, I probably would have said, good. But privately, I felt tense around money in a way I couldn't explain. Not anxious enough to panic, not relaxed enough to ignore, just constantly aware. I'd open my bank app and feel disappointed before I even looked at the numbers. Not because they were bad, but because they weren't comforting. There was never that exhale. I started asking myself quiet questions. Why does saving feel harder now than it used to? Why do small expenses irritate me more than they should? Why does every month feel like it ends faster? I kept looking for the cause. I went through transactions line by line, expecting to find something obvious, a mistake, an indulgence, a moment of carelessness, but there wasn't one. Instead, there were dozens of tiny things that all made sense on their own. A slightly nicer place because I wanted to feel more settled. Subscriptions I used just enough to justify keeping. Conveniences that saved time when I felt busy or tired. None of them felt optional anymore. That was the part that unsettled me. I realized I wasn't choosing most of my spending anymore. I was defending it. Every expense had a reason. Every increase had a story. And when everything has a reason, nothing feels removable. What surprised me most wasn't the total amount. It was how emotionally attached I'd become to my current setup. The idea of pulling back didn't feel like budgeting. It felt like downgrading my life, like admitting I couldn't handle the level I'd reached. And that's when it clicked. The tightness I felt wasn't about money, it was about identity. I had slowly built a version of my life that required constant financial maintenance. And even though I could technically afford it, I couldn't relax inside it, because there was no slack, no softness, no room to breathe. Every dollar already had a job before it arrived. That's when I understood why nothing big had to be wrong for things to feel heavy. The pressure wasn't coming from one bad decision. It was coming from the quiet expectation that things had to stay exactly as they were, forever. And once you notice that expectation, you start to question whether it's actually serving you. After I saw it that way, my relationship with money started to soften. Not because my numbers suddenly changed, but because the story I was telling myself began to change. I stopped asking, how do I afford this life? And started asking, how much life do I actually need? That question felt quieter, less performative, more honest. I began noticing how often I confused comfort with safety. Some comforts truly supported me. They reduced friction in meaningful ways. They gave me time, energy, or health. Others mostly distracted me. They filled small emotional gaps. They made days feel smoother, but they didn't make me feel more stable. Seeing that difference didn't happen in one afternoon. It happened slowly, through noticing my own reactions. Which expenses made me feel lighter? Which ones made me feel boxed in? I realized that money feels tight most when it's pre-decided, when every future dollar already belongs to a past choice. So instead of trying to optimize every expense, I became more interested in space. Not empty space, but flexible space. A margin that isn't assigned yet. A portion of income that doesn't have a narrative attached to it. That unassigned space started to feel more valuable than any upgrade. Not because it earned high returns, but because it gave me options. It gave me breathing room. It gave me the sense that tomorrow didn't already own all of my resources. I also noticed that stability isn't the same as looking stable. Looking stable is maintaining appearances. Stability is being able to absorb small shocks without emotional collapse. Those two things can exist far apart from each other. So my attention slowly moved away from keeping up, not in a dramatic way, not as a rejection of modern life, but as a quiet shift toward fewer fixed commitments, fewer decisions that permanently raised my floor, more decisions that preserved flexibility. The strange thing is, none of this felt like sacrifice. It felt like editing, like removing background noise, like turning down a volume knob I didn't realize had been creeping up. The tightness didn't disappear overnight, but it became understandable. And once something becomes understandable, it starts to feel workable. Not through force, not through extreme discipline, but through awareness. A steady, calm awareness of what's actually holding weight in your life and what isn't. Over time, I stopped trying to make my life feel impressive and started caring more about how it feels to live inside it. That shift didn't change my personality. It didn't turn me into a minimalist. It didn't make me uninterested in nice things. It just changed what I value underneath them. I still enjoy comfort. I still enjoy ease. But I no longer expect those things to carry my sense of safety. Safety comes from knowing I have room to adjust, room to make a mistake, room to handle something unexpected without everything else wobbling. When your money feels tight, even though nothing big is wrong, it doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you failed. It often means your life quietly grew heavier than your margin. And that's a human thing, a very normal thing. We live in a world that makes gradual expansion feel invisible, so noticing it at all is already a form of clarity. You don't have to tear your life apart. You don't have to chase some perfect system. Sometimes the most meaningful change is simply becoming aware of what actually gives you peace and what only pretends to. From there, choices tend to get simpler, not easier, but calmer, and calm choices compound in their own way. Eventually, money starts to feel less like something you're wrestling with and more like something you're standing beside. Not perfectly, not permanently, but steadily. And for a lot of people, that steady feeling is what they were looking for all along.